Hey there, my amazing friend. Tell me, which city and country are you watching from? Are you in a quiet little town or a giant city full of lights? Leave a comment below, and please share this video with your family and friends. It really helps me out. Let's jump right in. Alan Reed sat alone, bathed in the faint glow of twin monitors, long after the last of his co-workers had left for the night. As a senior engineer at Orion Automotive, he had earned a quiet reputation for staying behind to tackle the kinds of technical problems most others avoided. Resolving ERP system quirks wasn't officially part of his job, but Alan's deep knowledge of the company's digital backbone made him the person everyone quietly relied on when things went wrong. That evening he was combing through back-end system records, tracking down a misdirected ERP alert. Just another late-night task, or so he thought. The building around him was still, broken only by the soft hum of the air system and the occasional creak of shifting steel. His hands flew over the keyboard, eyes scanning endless lines of data and source code. Eventually, he located the culprit, a small bug in the platform's email forwarding logic. A supply chain memo had been mistakenly sent to a defunct inbox meant for archived messages. Just to be sure nothing else had slipped through unnoticed, Alan dug deeper into the logs. That's when a name popped up that made his fingers freeze mid-keystroke. Jenna Reed, his wife. He stared at the screen, wondering if fatigue was starting to distort what he saw. Why would Jenna's name appear in Orion's internal communication system? She didn't work there. Could it simply be someone else with the same name? But then he saw the email address and his stomach lurched. It was hers, no mistaking it. He recognized it immediately from years of their private messages. A tight, icy knot formed in his chest as he began tracing the anomaly, urgency overtaking hesitation. According to the audit trail, an email had been sent from an Orion employee account directly to Jenna's Gmail. The message looked like it had been forwarded automatically, likely as a result of the earlier email error. Still, Alan's pulse quickened. Maybe it was nothing. Perhaps someone had a valid reason to reach out to her. But just before midnight? That seemed unlikely. His fingers moved quickly, retrieving the message from the archive logs. His hand hesitated over the mouse, a weight of dread settling in his gut. Should he open it? Did he even have the right to? The question flickered briefly, then vanished, eclipsed by the need to know. He clicked. The screen filled with a message that turned his stomach and stopped his breath. Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about having you in my arms. I can still taste you, Jenna. I reserved the same hotel near your office for Friday, 8 p.m. Does your workaholic engineer husband have any idea? Doubt it. He's too buried in his job to see what you really crave. Alan felt as if the floor had been yanked from beneath him. His chair screeched as he pushed it away from the desk, the sound unnervingly loud in the silence. What the hell? He whispered, shaken. Part of him wanted to believe it was some twisted joke. A scam, maybe. Spam. Anything else. But then he saw who had sent it. Martin Blake. The name struck like a blow. Alan remembered him clearly, an executive at Apex Dynamics, Orion's most aggressive rival in the auto parts industry. They had met once, briefly, at a trade convention the year before. Martin had seemed every bit the charming corporate type. Sleek, confident, and all practiced smiles. But the words in the email painted a different picture, personal, explicit, and ending with a cruel jab. A mocking reminder of your overworked engineer husband. A nauseating wave churned in Alan's stomach as the realization slammed into him. Jenna, his Jenna, the woman he'd loved and trusted for 10 years, his partner in every sense, was sleeping with someone else. And it wasn't some anonymous fling or meaningless lapse. It was with a high-ranking executive at a direct competitor. The betrayal struck with brutal precision. A knife to the heart and a wrecking ball to his professional life. He felt gut-punched, reeling. Air caught in his throat, and he had to consciously drag in a breath, shallow, uneven. His hands hovered above the keyboard, fingers twitching. Could this really be happening? It was as if he'd stepped barefoot into a hidden power line in total darkness. He read the message again and again. Each word cut deeper than the last. Can't wait to taste you. My arms. Friday. Yedinchi. A rendezvous. And the parting jab, mocking him as just that oblivious engineer, topped off with a smug wink emoji from Martin. The screen itself seemed to sneer. Humiliation burned through Alan like acid, fury coiling tight in his throat. Suddenly it all made sense. Jenna's easy smiles, the ones that now felt rehearsed, the mysterious outings with friends, the endless nights spent at her volunteer group, all those excuses, the cryptic messages, the quiet calls she'd step away to take, the emotional distance he chalked up to fatigue. It was all in front of him now, cruel in its clarity. "You absolute fool," he whispered. It was all there, every sign. He shoved himself back from the desk, rising fast, then began pacing the floor of his empty office, stride lengthening with every turn. One hand dragged through his thick hair, gripping hard. The pain was searing, immediate, a collision of heartbreak and rage. But buried under the surge of emotion, something colder began to rise. Something sharper. Focus. Alan wasn't impulsive by nature. His years in engineering had trained him to stay composed, to analyze before acting, especially when everything was on the line. And this was the deepest fracture of his life. He couldn't afford to be reckless. For one brief, vivid moment, he envisioned bursting through that hotel room door on Friday night, catching them in the act, the look on Jenna's face, Martin's arrogance shattering on impact. A punch thrown, Jenna's scream, a scene spiraling into chaos. The fantasy stirred something dark in him, but it vanished almost as quickly as it came. Reality snapped back into place. A public outburst, cops, media attention? It would be a fleeting catharsis, and an enduring catastrophe. Worse, Martin might savor it, watching Alan implode. And Jenna? She'd already taken the parts of him that mattered most. He wouldn't hand her his dignity, too. That wasn't the story he'd let them write. Alan shut his eyes, inhaling deeply until the violent urge dulled. Then, deliberately, he sat back down and steadied his hand on the mouse. He saved the incriminating thread, then backed it up securely, off-network. Cold, methodical, evidence preserved. He'd need it. Because what lay ahead wasn't just emotional fallout. It was strategic warfare. This wasn't simply an affair. It was a hostile move. Martin wasn't just Jenna's secret lover. He was Alan's professional rival. And if Alan made the wrong move now, he'd lose more than his relationship. He'd lose everything he'd built. The fallout might spill into his professional life, staining more than just his home. That slight possibility rooted itself in Alan's mind, still muddled by emotion, but starting to anchor itself. There had to be a way to strike back, not with screaming or breakdowns, but with something colder, sharper. Still, he had to get through tonight first. With a few quick commands, Alan shut down the diagnostics and locked his terminal. The dark monitor reflected a version of him he barely recognized, jaw clenched, eyes burning. Not with tears, not yet. The fire inside him wasn't warm, it was glacial, cutting deep. 10 years of marriage, a decade of faith now hanging by a single frayed strand. Jenna's deception had loaded the gun. Tonight, Alan had pulled the trigger, not at her, not aloud, but inward, into himself. The shot landed quietly. No one else could hear it. Only he felt the impact. Back at their house, Jenna remained unaware, assuming he was once again working late. And Martin Blake? He hadn't the slightest clue. Alan planned to keep it that way, for the time being. If retribution was coming, it would be surgical, not sloppy. He steeled his expression and slipped into his jacket. His footsteps echoed through the barren corridor as he exited the Orion building. Outside, the night air was biting, unmoving. The stars overhead blinked indifferently. Unlocking his car, he sat in the driver's seat, hands gripping the wheel, unmoving. A dull pressure sat in his chest like a bruise that wouldn't fade. Yet beneath the hurt, something began to crystallize. A plan. They think I'm too distracted to notice, he thought, Martin's smug voice replaying like static. They see me as some oblivious tech guy buried in code. Alan's eyes narrowed. In that moment, he made a silent promise. He wouldn't storm in with accusations or plead for explanations. There would be no tears, no shouting, no warning signs. He would become what they underestimated. Calculating, composed, and relentless. They thought he was blind to it all. They would learn otherwise, too late to stop what was coming. Back home, he started gathering intel, quietly, methodically. He wore the mask of the unsuspecting husband with perfect precision. It was the hardest role he'd ever played. That night, he slipped under the covers beside Jenna. She shifted slightly, murmuring in that soft, familiar tone, still tender, still sweet, now tainted with deceit. His throat tightened, but he forced out a yawn, a drowsy smile she couldn't see in the dark. "Yeah," he said gently. "Just the usual database bugs. All handled. Go back to sleep." She gave a sleepy hum and sank deeper into the blankets. Within minutes, her breathing slowed into the rhythm of sleep. Alan stared at the ceiling, unmoving. How many nights had she returned to him like this, after spending the evening with Martin? Was she dreaming about that smug bastard now, even as her husband lay beside her in silence and fury? The thought contorted something inside him. His teeth ground together, pressure mounting in his jaw, but he kept his composure. He had to. Then came morning, then another. Alan maintained the illusion without faltering. He still kissed her goodbye, still sent cheerful check-ins over lunch. But the betrayal lived inside him now. Every ping of her phone, every seemingly innocent smile, cut like a shard of broken glass. And still, he gave her nothing. No suspicion, no hint that he knew. If anything, he seemed more attentive, more thoughtful. Not from love, but from a cold desire to watch, to witness how far the deception would go. Jenna navigated her deception flawlessly, engaging in light-hearted chatter and sharing easy smiles, maintaining the illusion that all was perfectly ordinary. On Wednesday evening, as their traditional date night approached, she casually mentioned her upcoming plans. "Did I mention Monica's engagement party?" she said during dinner, twirling her pasta without meeting Alan's gaze directly. "It's this Friday. I'll probably be late, so don't stay up waiting." Alan felt a sickening clench in his chest at the casual ease of her deception. Monica, yet again. There was no engagement party. Monica was just another convenient character Jenna had fabricated to hide her activities. Alan could have confronted her at that instant, dismantling her facade, observing the unraveling truth reflected in her eyes. But he refrained. Instead, he simply offered a smile and said, "Give Monica my congratulations." Inside him, though, something tore anew. Even now, given a clear opportunity to confess or show some remorse, Jenna chose to perpetuate the lie. Her continued dishonesty only strengthened Alan's determination. Later, once Jenna was deep in sleep, Alan quietly slipped from their bed, carefully making his way to their home office. Closing the door softly, he powered up his personal laptop. It was time to delve deeper into Martin Blake. If Alan was to act, and he had every intention of doing so, he needed more than just evidence of infidelity. He needed to know Martin's vulnerabilities, to grasp his world fully. Martin held a senior position at Apex Dynamics, a fact Alan had gleaned through industry connections. Apex Dynamics and Orion, Alan's employer, were fierce rivals, each supplying advanced gear systems to major automotive manufacturers. Alan was spearheading Orion's ambitious X90 transmission project, while Apex Dynamics had garnered substantial industry attention for its MK6 gearbox, a direct competitor frequently benchmarked against Alan's efforts. For years, the two corporations had been embroiled in intense competition over critical contracts. Then a memory surfaced. Several weeks prior, he'd picked Jenna up from what she claimed was a work dinner. Now, the truth seemed painfully clear. It had likely been another secret rendezvous with Martin. During the drive back, perhaps to dispel the awkward silence or divert Alan's curiosity, Jenna had casually mentioned, "Someone from Apex was talking about embargo complications, something involving a Middle Eastern supplier and American trade restrictions. It sounded complicated." At the time, preoccupied with an engineering issue he was wrestling with, Alan had scarcely paid attention, responding only with a distracted murmur before shifting the conversation elsewhere. But now, Jenna's offhand remark demanded his full attention. Embargo complications, Middle Eastern supplier, American trade controls. Had Jenna unknowingly provided him a strategic clue amidst her deception? Leaning forward, Alan began rapidly typing queries into his laptop. Apex Dynamics Middle East embargo supplier. He meticulously examined industry journals, specialized forums, and obscure news bulletins, assembling fragments until a coherent picture emerged. It appeared Apex's Mk6 gearbox relied on a unique valve sourced from a smaller firm based in the UAE. That critical valve incorporated proprietary components from an American manufacturer, and recent U.S. export regulations had tightened significantly, aiming to restrict high-tech products from reaching unstable regions. Alarmed by potential legal exposure, the U.S. firm had begun cautioning customers to tread carefully with international deliveries. Though details were vague, Alan's intuition confirmed it aligned precisely with Jenna's careless remark. If Apex Dynamics was concerned about potentially violating international trade restrictions with gearboxes containing these sensitive components, they were undoubtedly operating under intense regulatory scrutiny. Their legal advisors would certainly be vigilant. And suddenly, Alan realized he had uncovered a critical vulnerability. A calculated, surgical strike began to crystallize in his mind, a precise maneuver, strategically potent enough to decisively shift the power dynamics. Could Alan engineer a scenario compelling enough to convince Apex they were teetering dangerously close to violating stringent export regulations concerning their Mk6 gearboxes? He envisioned crafting a scenario grave enough to compel them to halt shipments or pause manufacturing, even if only temporarily, to avoid the devastating risks of colossal fines or criminal charges. As Alan continued contemplating this strategy, it grew increasingly sophisticated in his mind. Martin had publicly disgraced him, attacking him at a deeply personal level. Now, Alan saw a perfect chance to strike back precisely where Martin was most vulnerable, his professional standing. He imagined vividly the chain reaction. Apex's assembly line suddenly freezing, executives frantically convening emergency meetings behind closed doors, and Martin desperately attempting damage control in front of his superiors and board members. Meanwhile, Alan's own firm, Orion, could conveniently step forward to fill any resulting supply gaps, thus earning industry accolades, while leaving Martin to appear utterly inept. This calculated retaliation would eschew overt confrontation, relying instead on strategic deployment of misinformation and subtle deception, tactics Martin would never suspect coming from Alan, the seemingly modest and unassuming engineer. However, for Alan's idea to gain traction, vague rumors or mere insinuations would be insufficient. His claims needed to be robust, precise, and steeped in technical and legal detail, exactly the kind of substance capable of sending Apex into legitimate panic mode. Fortunately, all necessary information was publicly accessible, provided one knew exactly where and how deeply to investigate. Alan meticulously spent his evening delving into the complexities of U.S. export control laws. Soon his screen overflowed with acronyms and technical jargon: EAR, Export Administration Regulations, OFAC sanctions. His research uncovered that foreign-produced equipment, like Apex's gearboxes, containing certain thresholds of controlled U.S. origin parts, required special export licenses for delivery to restricted countries. Violating these rules, intentionally or not, meant severe legal repercussions. Typically, the critical threshold for compliance was a 25% content share of U.S. components. Yet, for countries designated as state sponsors of terrorism, the limit plummeted dramatically to merely 10%. Penalties for violations were severe, prison sentences stretching up to 20 years and fines reaching $1 million per violation for deliberate acts. Even inadvertent breaches could result in frozen assets and crippling civil fines. Alan's pulse quickened as he grasped the gravity of his discovery. This regulatory minefield represented exactly the sort of risk that any company's logistics team would desperately wish to sidestep. If he could persuade Apex to believe that their Mk6 gearboxes presented such significant legal vulnerabilities, the company would surely halt all operations pending a thorough internal investigation. No organization would willingly risk the seizure of their products or the incarceration of senior executives, even under mere suspicion. Allen immediately began crafting a detailed plan. He would assume the identity of a compliance consultant or a legal specialist, anonymously alerting Apex to an invented, but convincingly plausible, compliance issue. Privately, he labeled it a fabricated compliance concern. The alert had to be meticulously constructed, brimming with credible technical intricacies and dense legal jargon to enhance its authenticity. His scenario involved a manufactured claim that the Mk6 gearbox incorporated a valve from the UAE, allegedly embedded with enough U.S. origin technology to surpass the critical 10% threshold. Furthermore, he would subtly imply intelligence reports suggesting these components were inadvertently reaching sanctioned nations through third-party intermediaries. He would also discreetly insinuate increased regulatory scrutiny around cargo shipments in that geographical region. Critically, Allen didn't intend to trigger an actual official investigation. Involving genuine regulatory agencies would risk collateral damage beyond his control. Instead, he aimed only to create sufficient uncertainty to force Apex into an internal audit of their entire supply chain, just enough smoke to imply fire without fully igniting a blaze. The challenge now was ensuring his warning would not be casually disregarded. An anonymous tip would carry too little credibility. For maximum impact, the message needed to appear to originate from a trustworthy, authoritative source. Impersonating a government official was off-limits, too risky and easily discredited. A more believable alternative would be posing as an independent compliance expert with credible industry experience, someone whose claims would seem informed by authentic industry insights and overheard professional discussions. To convincingly execute his deception, Allen knew he'd need a polished professional email address, flawless mastery of compliance language, and ideally a familiar point of reference Apex would recognize. Mentally scanning his professional network, he recalled McAllen and Tate, a law firm both Orion and Apex had previously collaborated with. If he presented himself as a former consultant from that firm, his fabricated narrative would possess precisely the credibility and authenticity required to unsettle Apex deeply. A subtle smirk curled at the edges of Allen's lips. Martin Blake could never have fathomed that the mild-mannered engineer was capable of such calculated cunning. By Thursday, Allen had already meticulously initiated his plan. He began by obscuring his online presence, channeling all his web traffic through a secure VPN to erase digital footprints. Next, he set up an entirely new email account using an encrypted platform, adopting the alias Daniel Harris, a trade compliance specialist. To lend his new persona legitimacy, Allen invested $50 to acquire a minimalist web domain registered as Harris Consulting LLC. With haste, he pieced together a basic, single-page website, drawing heavily on jargon and phrasing borrowed from authentic compliance firms. It was simplistic yet convincing enough to appear as a credible independent consultancy. Next, Allen's plan required making contact within Apex Dynamics. He conducted precise research on LinkedIn and quickly settled on Gavin Price, the supply chain manager, as the ideal recipient. He carefully crafted an email with a subject line designed for maximum urgency. Immediate compliance concern. Possible EAR OFAC violations related to Mk6 shipments. His fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard, driven by a focused, ruthless determination. In his email, the invented Daniel Harris positioned himself as a conscientious industry insider, raising an urgent alarm. He detailed that, through credible industry connections, he had learned Apex Dynamics Mk6 gearboxes included a specific ZX12 valve sourced from Al Sharouk Industrial in the UAE. Crucially, this valve incorporated components originally manufactured by the American company, Fairmont. Recent updates in U.S. export controls and sanction enforcement meant any products containing over 10% American-sourced materials required explicit authorization when shipped to certain Middle Eastern territories. He further implied that shipments of Mk6 gearboxes might currently be destined for or passing through countries like Jordan or Oman via third-party distributors. Such shipments could inadvertently violate U.S. export regulations. The email concluded starkly. Enforcement was intensifying, penalties severe, with fines potentially reaching $1 million per infraction and imprisonment for up to 2 decades. Harris strongly recommended that Apex undertake an immediate compliance audit and graciously offered his expertise, even suggesting he could discreetly liaise with the Department of Commerce to mitigate risk. Allen meticulously reviewed the message twice, satisfied by its precise blend of fact and plausible exaggeration. The technical details appeared credible, and the legal warnings sufficiently alarming to trigger anxiety among cautious executives. Offering assistance further masked his email as a gesture of professional goodwill rather than an outright threat. The suggestion of severe legal penalties added just the right edge of unease. If he had received such an email regarding Orion's products, it would have shaken him profoundly. Confidently, Allen dispatched the email late Thursday night, timed perfectly, so Gavin Price would encounter it immediately upon opening his inbox Friday morning. Now, all Allen needed to do was wait patiently as Apex's internal processes descended into turmoil. He anticipated that by Friday afternoon, panic would ripple throughout their offices. But Friday held more than corporate sabotage. It carried an even more personal objective. Merely damaging Martin's professional standing wasn't sufficient. Allen sought irrefutable proof to confront Martin and Jenna, evidence immune to denial or evasion. While the intercepted emails were incriminating, skeptics might dismiss them as misunderstandings or forgeries. A video recording, however, would be incontrovertible. He had quietly been preparing for precisely this opportunity throughout the week. Secretly syncing Jenna's phone to an unused tablet he had on hand, achieved by momentarily borrowing her device under the guise of performing a software update, allowed him ongoing access to her messages. By logging in with her Apple ID and installing hidden tracking software, he monitored her communications meticulously. Through this clandestine surveillance, he discovered their intended rendezvous. Friday at 8 p.m., Regency Suites downtown, a discreet establishment conveniently close to Apex headquarters. Clearly, Martin preferred convenience in his affairs. Allen had no desire for an explosive confrontation, at least not immediately. Instead, he intended a quiet capture, undeniable visual proof of their betrayal. Yet arranging hidden filming in a hotel room had seemed insurmountably challenging. Then, unexpectedly, an ideal solution presented itself Thursday afternoon. Jenna texted Martin, suggesting a casual drink at his office before their hotel meeting, as he was scheduled to remain at work until 7. This was Allen's moment. Martin's text was succinct yet unmistakable. "Great. Office will be locked. I'll have drinks ready to celebrate the weekend." Nothing more needed to be said. The meaning was unmistakable. They'd be meeting privately in his office after everyone else had left, probably just the two of them. Allen didn't require further confirmation. If he could discreetly plant a camera in Martin's office beforehand, he wouldn't have to waste time tailing them to a hotel. The evidence would conveniently present itself. That same evening, he initiated his plan under the guise of inspecting a test run at the manufacturing plant, a plausible excuse he had casually mentioned to Jenna earlier that day. In reality, his destination was the corporate headquarters of Apex Dynamics. Allen knew the building, a sleek, contemporary edifice composed of steel and glass nestled discreetly within an industrial district on the other side of town, but he'd never actually stepped foot inside. He assumed the executive offices occupied the uppermost floor. Caution was crucial. Getting caught infiltrating a competitor's offices would unquestionably destroy his professional reputation. However, he banked on the office being largely empty by about 6:30 or 7 p.m., and perhaps the advantage of a familiar face helping him blend in unnoticed. He naturally didn't possess a genuine Apex employee badge. Instead, he had something else entirely. A few days prior, while searching desperately for tangible proof of Jenna's affair, He'd stumbled upon a strange keepsake stashed in a box at the back of her closet, an Apex employee ID badge. It featured Martin's name and photograph, clearly a playful token or memento from their earliest encounters, almost certainly an unofficial blank obtained from an informal source. Initially, the badge had filled Alan with fury, the sheer audacity, the arrogant smugness of it. But now, this artifact could actually serve a practical purpose. At a quick glance, the badge looked completely authentic. Clad in a blazer and formal trousers, the badge visibly clipped to his waistband, Alan felt confident he could pass convincingly as an Apex employee, at least for the brief moment needed to slip inside behind legitimate staff. Friday evening arrived, 6:15 p.m. Employees from the day shift trickled steadily from the building, chatting lightly among themselves as they headed toward their cars. Alan blended smoothly into one of these small groups, walking confidently towards the glass entrance. His outward demeanor was calm, though his heart was hammering fiercely. As he entered the lobby amid the departing staff, he nodded casually to the security guard behind the reception desk. The guard barely looked up, glanced briefly at Alan's badge, recognized the familiar Apex logo, and then resumed scrolling on his phone. He was inside. The lobby was subdued, bathed softly in the amber glow of the fading sunlight, streaming through tall windows that stretched from floor to ceiling. Alan moved briskly but purposefully, as if fulfilling a routine end-of-day task. He knew exactly where to go, having already memorized the building's directory. Executive suites were indeed located on the 5th floor. Fortunately, the elevator didn't require special access for that particular level. Moments later, the elevator doors opened onto a hushed, luxuriously carpeted corridor. The hallway stretched silently ahead, lined on both sides with polished doors, each subtly marked by understated nameplates. At the far end, corner office, Martin Blake, Vice President, Operations. Of course, Martin occupied a prestigious corner suite, with a magnificent view of the city skyline, now glowing softly in hues of pink and gold. No one appeared to be nearby. Approaching stealthily, Alan tested the handle. Locked, as expected. He swiftly pulled out a small toolkit concealed in his jacket, the same one he typically used for working on engineering prototypes. Tension wrench, lockpick, a steady grip. The lock was standard, nothing special. Within 30 seconds, he heard the faint click. Alan slipped silently inside, easing the door shut gently behind him. Martin's office mirrored the building itself, sleek, pristine, impeccably maintained. Warm evening light poured generously into the tidy room, highlighting a plush leather couch and a glass coffee table topped with a decanter, likely the drinks Martin had promised. Alan consciously suppressed any thoughts of what would transpire there later. Dominating the space was a large mahogany desk, immaculately arranged with neat piles of paperwork and polished pens. Photographs and awards lined the shelves, Martin smiling proudly with a golf trophy, shaking hands ceremoniously with corporate executives. Clearly, he relished reminders of his own success. Alan didn't linger. He retrieved the tiny camera, a motion-activated micro-DVR barely bigger than a coin, from his pocket. Scanning the room efficiently, he quickly concealed the device between two books on a shelf, adjusting its lens carefully towards the couch. He picked the bookshelf adjacent to the sofa. A few decorative vases sat just densely enough to serve as effective cover. He nestled the camera behind a deep black ceramic vase, lining it up at chest height, so it pointed directly at the couch, capturing part of the desk as well, right where anything meaningful was likely to unfold. The device had no internet access, no wireless, no data feed. The risk of exposure was too high. Instead, it would silently record everything onto local storage. He activated the motion and sound detection settings, then carefully examined the scene to make sure it all looked untouched. Unless someone leaned in for a closer look, the camera would remain invisible. Satisfied with its concealment, he stepped back. It was set to operate independently now. A cold, clinical sense of gratification took root as he imagined the lens capturing Martin and Jenna, caught in the act. The feeling was complicated, a harsh cocktail of sorrow and something darker, almost anticipatory. This was the weapon he would use to bring Martin down. And Jenna too. He refused to think about what it might do to him to watch it later. Not yet. That part of himself, he shoved deep into the background, locking his focus on the task ahead. Alan exited the office in silence, the door locking behind him with a gentle click. The entire job had taken no more than 3 minutes. As he walked toward the elevators, faint laughter echoed from somewhere, a janitor maybe, or a few late workers on another floor. He kept his pace natural, his posture easy. No one approached him. The security guard gave only a glance as Alan strolled through the front entrance into the dimming twilight of the parking lot. Outside, he drew in a deep breath. The rush of adrenaline began to ebb. The first phase of his plan was underway. The second had already been activated, launched earlier via a precisely worded email. The third phase, the collapse, was fast approaching. By 8 that night, Alan sat parked a block from Apex headquarters, hidden in the gloom of a deserted lot. He had debated the timing, whether to return right after the recording or delay his move. Too early, and he risked running into them. Too late, and someone else might discover it, though unlikely before Monday. He decided to wait them out. Darkness was his ally, and Martin's old lock-picking tools were still in his possession. For now, he had to stay patient. His phone buzzed. Jenna had messaged. "At the party. So much fun. Don't wait up. Love you." Alan's hand tightened around the device. "Love you?" The sheer nerve of it made him feel sick. He exhaled slowly and with control, then replied, calm and measured, "Glad you're enjoying it. Have fun." The contrast was staggering. There he sat, cloaked in night, sending pleasantries to the woman actively deceiving him, even as he waited to capture her betrayal. The strange split reality twisted in his mind. But he kept his focus, locked onto the larger goal. To kill time, Alan turned to another part of his strategy. By now, Apex's supply chain lead would have received the compliance flag he had sent earlier. Using his tablet, he logged into a burner account, set up solely to track replies and monitor back-channel chatter from contacts in the field. That afternoon, he'd nudged a loose-lipped acquaintance on Orion's sales team, a guy known for talking too much after a drink or two. Alan had casually inquired whether anything unusual was happening over at Apex. The reply had caught his interest. "Heard some weird stuff. Apparently Apex might be experiencing a delay. One of my clients said their MK6 gearbox shipment got pushed back due to some paperwork issue. No idea what's actually going on." This was exactly the response Alan had been counting on. His plan, laced with just enough misdirection, was already starting to take effect. It was likely that Gavin Price at Apex had noticed something off about the outgoing shipments. Most likely their compliance team, or maybe legal, had gotten involved, pausing operations while they dug into the issue. Alan could imagine the entire sequence playing out. At some point Friday afternoon, Martin Blake had probably received a frantic call, urgent and unexpected, delivering the news that outgoing deliveries were abruptly put on hold. Alan could visualize Martin briskly stepping into a glass-walled conference room, Gavin waiting there with files and a tight expression. The air would be thick with questions and unease, perhaps even a sense of impending crisis. Martin might not have the technical know-how to understand every detail, but he'd recognize the danger. Would he suspect someone had planted the issue? Probably not. Disruptions like this weren't unusual in their industry. New rules emerged constantly, and even major players got caught off guard now and then. Right now, Martin was probably grumbling about bad timing or bureaucratic delays, completely oblivious to the fact that none of it was coincidence. Alan was the architect of the chaos. That realization gave him a quiet satisfaction as the night wore on. Around 9:30 p.m., headlights pierced through the exit of Apex's underground garage. Alan, already watching from a distance, immediately recognized the sleek black Audi. It was Martin's. He'd seen it at a conference some months ago. Raising the telephoto lens of the camera he'd brought, always meticulous, always prepared, he zoomed in on the two figures seated up front, Martin and Jenna, no doubt headed to the Regency to continue the affair they thought no one knew about. A dull ache twisted in Alan's gut as he stared at the scene. Even after engineering every step of this setup, the pain hadn't dulled. He wanted to feel only rage at Jenna, and a part of him did. But he shoved those feelings deep down, out of reach. For now, she was just another piece on the board. To stay in control, he had to stay detached. Once the Audi turned down the avenue and slipped into the city's nightscape, Alan made his way back toward Apex. By now, it was just shy of 10 o'clock. The building loomed dark and quiet, its windows blackened, save for a few sporadic motion lights inside. The main entrance was locked, and the night guard was probably making rounds or napping in the lounge. Alan took a different route this time, a side door he had inspected during a previous visit. It had an electronic lock. Using a modified gym card and exploiting a flaw in the latch he'd already identified, he got in without triggering any alarms. Inside, the hallways were dead quiet. He made for the elevator and rode it to Martin's floor, retracing the path he'd taken earlier that week. The corridor was empty, not a sound in the air. He reached Martin's office and deftly picked the lock again, slipping inside. On the desk sat the camera he had left behind. He checked the device. Several clips had been recorded. Excellent. After pocketing it, he paused to take one final look around the room. It needed to appear untouched, like no one had ever been there. Then his eyes landed on a picture frame sitting near the edge of the desk. It showed Martin and Jenna at some formal gala, dressed to perfection, posing like royalty. An inscription ran along the silver frame. "Here's to new friendships, cheers." The smugness of it made Alan's jaw tighten. His hand curled into a fist before he even realized it. For a moment he considered smashing the frame against the wall, but restraint prevailed. Instead, he opened the back carefully and slid the photo out. He tucked it into his pocket and rummaged through the drawer, pulling out a different photo. Martin alone, beaming proudly. He slipped that one into the frame and snapped it shut. The newly altered frame went right back in its original place, aligned perfectly. Now, Martin stood alone in the picture, arm extended as if around someone no longer there, grinning at empty air. It was a petty move, but it gave Alan a flicker of satisfaction. Let Martin puzzle over what had shifted. Alan turned the key behind him, locking the door with quiet precision before disappearing into the night without a trace. When he finally stepped into his apartment just after midnight, the space was still deserted. Jenna hadn't come back. He didn't find that surprising. She probably assumed he'd be fast asleep by then and figured there was no reason to return until morning. That was just as well. It meant the apartment, and more crucially, his private study, was entirely his for the night. Alone behind the locked study door, Alan connected the miniature surveillance camera to his laptop and inhaled slowly. Then with steady fingers he hit play. The video sprang to life, grainy footage under the weak lighting in Martin's office, but clear enough. There she was, Jenna. She entered the room, kissed Martin in greeting. Alan's stomach knotted, but he kept his eyes fixed on the screen. He forced himself to watch, determined to absorb every second, to let the images burn into his mind. They moved toward the sofa. Their words were indistinct, but just audible enough to follow. Martin was venting, no doubt about the crisis Alan himself had orchestrated, while Jenna stood behind him, her hands working his shoulders in an unmistakably intimate gesture. "That export problem is destroying me," Martin muttered, dragging his fingers through his hair in frustration. "We had to shut the whole thing down today. Complete meltdown." Jenna replied in a low, soothing murmur, barely above a whisper. "Come here," she breathed. "Let me help you forget." What came next sent heat surging through Alan's body. Anger, humiliation, a sense of unreality. Jenna straddled Martin, and their kiss deepened. Clothes began to fall away, one item at a time. Alan stopped the video. He'd seen enough. The recording had fulfilled its purpose. Watching further would only drive the knife deeper. He scrubbed through the footage, stopping at a single frame, undeniable, damning. Jenna, mid-climax, her face twisted in ecstasy, clear as crystal. That was the evidence he needed. He saved a few key frames and closed the file. Snapping the laptop shut, Alan leaned back in his chair, exhaling a tremulous breath. Seeing her like that, with Martin, was a brutal blow, even if he'd suspected it all along. He pressed his palms into his eyes, trying to muffle the rising scream in his throat. He refused to break down, not yet. Not when something darker and stronger had taken root inside him. A cold, unshakable sense of triumph. They were exposed. Caught in the act. Whatever love had once existed between him and Jenna had been reduced to ash. She'd made her choice, and now so had he. No redemption. No coming back. Alan didn't sleep that night. He stayed on the couch, wide-eyed, his mind churning, running through the next step of his plan, sharpening every detail like a blade. The final move was approaching, and he would execute it with ruthless precision. The perfect setup. Just as Alan had orchestrated, his covert warning to Apex Dynamics slipped silently into their system and detonated like a digital ghost. Early Friday morning, Gavin Price, head of supply chain, opened an anonymous email signed by Daniel Harris and went pale. Panic set in almost instantly. By mid-morning, internal alarm bells were ringing. Executives scrambled to contain the fallout, scheduling crisis meetings back-to-back. Phone lines across the company crackled with urgency. By lunchtime, the directive came down. All MK6 gearbox shipments were to be halted immediately, pending a full-scale compliance audit. Production lines were suspended. Assembly workers were sent away early, while upper management huddled in behind closed doors, frantically searching for answers. Back at Orion, in the calm of his own office, Alan observed the chaos from afar, his demeanor composed. The first ripple reached him via a casual message from a colleague in sales. "Hey, weird news. One of our clients said Apex is holding off on a gearbox order? Something about legal complications? You have any idea what that's about?" Alan read the message and allowed a small, restrained smile to curl at the edge of his mouth. "I can't say for certain, but something tells me there's a storm brewing," he remarked coolly, concealing the electric thrill that pulsed beneath the surface. A subtle wave of gratification washed over him. He had successfully ground a competitor's logistics operation to a halt, using nothing more than a carefully crafted email and the company's own aversion to regulatory risk. Meanwhile, across town at Apex Dynamics, Martin Blake was experiencing what might have been the most exasperating day of his career. Late Friday morning, he burst into a conference room, where Gavin from legal and several senior leaders were gathered around a pile of printed emails. "Can someone explain why the MK6 line has completely shut down?" Martin's tone was sharp, though he struggled to keep a lid on his rising temper. Gavin, looking uneasy, nudged a document across the table. "This came in anonymously. It's a tip suggesting we could be violating U.S. export regulations," he said. "It highlights that components used in our MK6 gearboxes might exceed the 10% U.S. origin threshold for restricted markets." Martin's brow furrowed as he scanned the page. "Is this even real? And who the hell is Harris?" A composed woman in minimalist glasses, the company's chief legal officer, responded before Gavin could. "We haven't been able to identify Harris yet, but the statute he's referring to is absolutely legitimate," she said firmly. "And even if this is only partly accurate, we can't afford to dismiss it. The consequences for getting this wrong could be extremely serious, even criminal." Martin clenched his teeth. As much as he wanted to dismiss it all, he knew she was right. The risks were far too great, enormous fines, possibly worse, and he couldn't afford that, not in his position as vice president of operations. "All right," he said stiffly. "Shut the line down, but just for now, I want answers. Contact UOE's valve supplier immediately and bring in Lupin Fremont if necessary. I want an exact breakdown of the U.S. content in those units, and a full log of where every shipment is being routed." Inside, he was fuming. The timing couldn't have been worse. The board was already breathing down his neck about unreachable sales targets. And now this, a murky legal crisis that could derail everything. Elsewhere in the city, Alan was quietly watching the chaos unfold from a safe distance, relying on indirect updates to piece together the unfolding situation. By Friday afternoon, the industry grapevine was alive with speculation. No official announcement had come from Apex, but the rumors were circulating fast. One even appeared on a niche industry forum. "Word is Apex halted shipments over an export issue. Anyone got details?" Alan captured a screenshot, relishing the moment. He felt a wave of satisfaction, almost giddy, wash over him. That evening, while stealthily recording a conversation between Martin and Jenna as part 2 of his operation, he allowed himself a brief moment of admiration for how flawlessly the scheme was playing out. All it had taken was a single email, a few carefully chosen words on a screen, to throw a massive division of his rival into disarray. The simplicity of it made it all the more beautiful. Still, Alan wasn't under any illusions. He knew Apex wouldn't remain paralyzed for long. By early the following week, they'd be knee-deep in paperwork, calling lawyers and vendors, and likely figuring out it was either exaggerated or a case of misunderstood compliance. The line would restart soon enough, maybe in a few days. That was fine. He never needed Apex to collapse, just to stumble when it mattered. And stumble they did. Throughout the weekend, the MK6 assembly line sat idle, waiting for a legal green light. The disruption rippled outward. Trucks meant to carry finished products sat unused. Warehouses began to overflow with unsent inventory. Further down the supply chain, auto plants in Detroit and assembly sites in Europe started sending alarms about missing deliveries. When Monday arrived, Apex's CEO convened an urgent executive meeting. Martin found himself squarely in the crosshairs, blamed for failing to foresee the compliance issue. In response, he turned up the pressure on his compliance department, ordering around-the-clock efforts to verify the tip's validity. They even reached out, discreetly, to a contact at the Department of Commerce. But all they received in return was a vague caution against pushing boundaries. In parallel, Apex drafted a carefully crafted memo to its board, explaining the shipment freeze was a precautionary measure driven by regulatory prudence. Martin felt the ground shift beneath his professional footing. If the current situation wasn't resolved quickly, he knew he'd be the scapegoat. Alan, as expected, was well aware of this. More than that, he was counting on it. Tension was thick, laced with a hint of opportunism. As Apex tangled itself deeper in bureaucratic delays, Orion Automotive, and Alan in particular, stood ready to move. By Tuesday, discreet whispers of Apex's troubles had already made their way to key clients in Orion's network. One of them, Galaxy Motors, had a supply deal in place with Apex for MK6 gearboxes needed for an upcoming SUV launch. Now those components were stuck in limbo. With time slipping away, Galaxy's procurement division reached out to Orion, their contingency vendor, looking for an urgent fix. That morning, Orion's sales director pulled together a quick strategy meeting. Alan took his seat alongside department leads as the sales head briefed them. Apex is slipping. Regulatory delays have frozen their gearbox shipments. Galaxy's asked if we can deliver 100 X90 units on a rush basis. They're under pressure to keep assembly running. He scanned the room, clearly feeling the weight of the ask. Is it even possible in less than a week? It's a massive effort. Alan leaned forward, his tone even but assured. We can do it. All attention locked on him. As lead engineer on the X90 project, his word held authority. Our inventory is solid, and the production line has unused capacity. I've run the projections, he stated, though, in truth, he hadn't done the full math. Over the weekend, acting on instinct, he had quietly placed orders for materials and prepped the facility without notifying leadership. If we authorize overtime, we can get 100 units out the door in 5 days. The VP of Engineering narrowed his eyes. You're sure? We'd need to reassign resources from other programs. Alan gave a faint smile. Galaxy's a premium client. If we come through now, they won't forget it. He didn't need to say the rest. Apex wouldn't forget either, but not in a way they'd appreciate. The CEO's voice came through the speakerphone, decisive and immediate. Do it. Approve whatever's needed. Extra shifts, expedited shipping. Just make it happen. We can't afford to disappoint Galaxy. And with that, the deal was set in motion. By nightfall, Orion had locked in the emergency supply order. No announcements were made, no headlines. But those watching the industry saw the shift happening. Orion quietly redirected stock that had been allocated to smaller accounts, funneling product to Galaxy instead. The sidelined customers, sensing the bigger picture, offered minimal resistance. Some even welcomed Apex's stumble. In the shadows, Orion was becoming the savior Galaxy needed. Apex, on the other hand, was falling into the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Alan was everywhere during the ramp-up, on the floor, late into the night, ensuring the operation ran smoothly. His commitment didn't go unnoticed. "You saved our skins, Alan," said the production supervisor while coordinating new shift schedules. "If you hadn't prepped in advance, this would be a disaster. How'd you see it coming?" Alan offered a modest shrug. "I try to stay ahead of the curve," he replied. Inside, though, he allowed himself a cold flicker of pride. His standing at Orion was climbing fast, just as Martin's grip at Apex was slipping away. There was a kind of poetic symmetry to it. Others recognized the irony, too. By midweek, industry chatter had begun. Orion had swooped in to rescue Galaxy. That one company could be paralyzed by its own red tape wasn't unusual. But another seizing the moment? That left a mark. Martin Blake surely realized the stakes by now. With each passing day that Apex's lines sat idle, Orion wasn't just collecting revenue, they were collecting prestige, and at Apex's expense. At Apex's warehouse, the failure was laid bare. Rows of MK6 gearboxes sat untouched, clogging loading docks, awaiting the clearance that never seemed to come. The compliance department remained buried beneath a mountain of paperwork, combing through each document with painstaking detail to ensure no oversight had occurred. Gavin Price had even taken the drastic step of contacting the Bureau of Industry and Security, a decision that, in retrospect, might appear excessive, especially since no actual violation had taken place. Yet, without definitive clearance, the situation remained unresolved and tense. The CEO's patience was thinning rapidly, and the board had demanded a formal status update to be delivered by Friday. Martin could feel the pressure coiling in his chest like a vice. This debacle had, without question, landed squarely on his shoulders. As if the professional turmoil wasn't enough, Martin's personal world was beginning to unravel. Early Thursday morning, something unusual caught his attention. A framed photo that had long sat on his desk, a snapshot of him and Jenna, looked altered. Jenna was gone from the picture. Only his own image remained. Perplexed, he picked it up and examined it closely. Was this some kind of prank? Or a cryptic message from Jenna herself? Confronting her in the office wasn't possible, so he quickly sent her a text. "Did you take the photo from my office, the one of us?" Her reply came swiftly. "What? Why would I do that?" A chill crept through him. If Jenna wasn't responsible, who had tampered with the image? The idea that one of the janitorial staff had done it seemed absurd. But for the first time, the unsettling notion entered his mind. Someone may have accessed his office without him knowing. He had no proof, just a gnawing unease that wouldn't let go. Jenna, meanwhile, was grappling with her own rising panic. Martin's strange question about the photo had thrown her off balance. Combined with Alan's oddly calm demeanor in recent days, her anxiety began to simmer. Could Alan have discovered the affair? She replayed their latest conversations in her mind. He had been composed, even considerate, no trace of resentment. If he had found out, surely he would have confronted her by now. Still, she tried to push the fear aside. She told herself it had to be a simple mistake, a clerical mishap, nothing more. But Alan's quiet was not ignorance, it was deliberate. He was methodically setting the stage, biding his time. In just days, he had destabilized Martin's standing at work, while simultaneously rising in quiet prominence within the company. Apex's stumble had become Orion's gain. His manager had even sent him a note of praise. "Excellent foresight on the Galaxy account. Your leadership is making a mark." There were even murmurs of a promotion drifting through the halls. Alan brushed off the accolades with modesty. But in private, he allowed himself a rare moment of satisfaction, standing before the mirror, letting the sense of long-awaited justice wash over him. But he wasn't done. The crescendo had yet to come. Martin might survive the embarrassment of a halted supply chain. The incident could be spun as an abundance of caution or an unfortunate misstep in timing. Apex might recover, patch up client relations, and sweep the matter under the rug. But Alan was planning something far more devastating, an irreversible blow to Martin's career. He held the trump card in the form of a tiny memory card, containing irrefutable evidence, footage of Martin and Jenna's affair. By the close of the following week, Apex Dynamics ended their voluntary suspension. The compliance team concluded that the Harris complaint lacked any substance. There had been no violations. Shipments resumed and normal operations were reinstated. Yet the damage had been done. The CEO was furious, not just about the disruption to production, but about the lapse in judgment that had led them there in the first place. Later that day, in a boardroom thick with tension, Martin found himself cornered, having to explain not only why the quarterly numbers were slipping, but, more alarmingly, why a major client like Galaxy Motors was now listening to pitches from Orion. Word eventually filtered back to Alan. Martin Blake's name had surfaced more than once, each mention sharpened by irritation. Martin could sense the pressure closing in. That Friday evening, he sat alone in his office, a glass of scotch in hand, idly rotating it by the stem. Jenna hadn't come by. Not that day, not at all that week. Their last meeting had been their only one in recent memory, and since then, Martin had been caught up in desperate efforts to contain the damage. As the sky dimmed and dusk painted long shadows across the city skyline, Martin reviewed the week's chaos in his mind. One thought kept clawing its way back. Was this just an unlucky streak, or had someone deliberately set this in motion? Orion's swift, calculated maneuver still haunted him. Their timing had been too exact, their execution too flawless. It felt less like business acumen and more like foreknowledge. Had someone tipped them off? Industrial sabotage was rare, but not unheard of. Could there be a mole? He tried to dismiss it. It sounded paranoid, but the bitterness of being outplayed refused to let him move on. Then his phone vibrated. A new email had come in. The subject line slammed into him like a punch to the gut. Know about your affair. The sender's name was unrecognizable. The body of the message was empty, save for a single file attached, a photo. Martin's fingers trembled as he opened it. The image was blurry, but unmistakable. It was him and Jenna, caught mid-embrace on the office sofa, disheveled, entangled, exposed. His face drained of color. In a panic, he sprang up and locked his office door, as if that could shield him from the consequences now looming. Almost immediately, a second message dropped into his inbox. Same sender. We need to talk, tonight, for your own good. Below that, an address. A small public park across town. The time, 1 hour from now. Martin stared at the screen, his pulse thundering. Blackmail. It had to be. But who would do this? His first instinct, Jenna's husband. Alan. They'd only met briefly, a long time ago. Martin couldn't even summon a clear image of the man's face. But who else would have access to something that incriminating? Then the puzzle pieces slammed together in Martin's mind. The subtle oddities he'd overlooked. That peculiar photo on Jenna's desk. The vague consultancy messages. The inconsistencies. The picture became clear, each fragment snapping into place like the tumblers of a lock. Alan Reed, the soft-spoken engineer Martin had once dismissed as too forgettable to notice anything. But Alan had noticed, and more than that, he had orchestrated it. The revelation made Martin's stomach twist with dread, and, disturbingly, with grudging respect. He tried calling Jenna. The line rang unanswered. She was probably at home. He didn't leave a voicemail. What could he even say? Instead, Martin inhaled slowly, tried to calm the storm inside him, and accepted the grim truth. He would have to show up to that meeting, likely with Alan, and find a way to beg, bargain, or somehow salvage what he could. Because if that photo ever reached the Apex Executive Board, it wouldn't just be a scandal. It would be the end. Of everything. Apex upheld a strict ethical code with unwavering precision. Any executive discovered in compromising entanglements, especially those that left them susceptible to leverage, was promptly ousted to protect the company's integrity. Martin still recalled the humiliating downfall of a previous Boeing CEO, publicly dismissed for lapses in judgment and questionable leadership. Now, Martin found himself teetering at the same precarious ledge. One misstep and everything, his position, reputation, even the hope of a dignified exit, could evaporate in an instant. By the time he reached the park, dusk had surrendered to night. cloaking everything in an uneasy calm. His eyes scanned the shadowy landscape, nerves taut, instinctively searching for the person who had summoned him. Then, from the darkness beneath a cluster of trees, Alan stepped forward, half lit by the hazy glow of a distant lamp. Martin recognized him immediately. The man he had betrayed now stood before him, expression unreadable and cold. In Alan's hand, a slim manila envelope hung like a verdict. Martin approached slowly, chilled sweat breaking across his skin despite the crisp night air. "Alan, listen, Alan's voice interrupted him, composed but cutting. "Mr. Blake," he said evenly. "Glad you came. I think we both understand why you're here." With deliberate movement, Alan opened the envelope and spread out several photographs. Even in the dim light, Martin could clearly discern what they showed. Images pulled from surveillance, each one damning. Alan's jaw tensed. "There's a video, too," he added. "Crystal clear, with sound. It captures everything." For a second, Martin's stunned silence gave way to fury. He lunged a step forward, his face flushed with indignation, voice sharp with accusation. "So it was you," he snapped. "You orchestrated this. Thought you could trap me and come out untouched? You smug little—" But the threat lost steam mid-breath. His outrage evaporated, smothered by the reality staring up at him from the photos now trembling in his grip. There was nothing to deny, nothing to fight. He was cornered, and he felt it. His bravado collapsed, replaced by raw fear. Hands rising in a silent plea, Martin's demeanor shifted. The once assured executive now looked pale and broken. "Please, Alan, I'm sorry," he said, his voice rushed and trembling. "I never meant for any of this to happen. Jenna and it wasn't planned. It just happened. If you've been behind the chaos this past week, the delays, the tech failures, I understand. Really. But I'm begging you, don't release that footage. It would ruin me." Alan remained silent, his gaze as unyielding as stone. The pause stretched out like a noose. Martin kept talking, desperate to fill the void. "If you want me out, I'll walk," he offered. "I'll end things with Jenna permanently. You'll never have to deal with either of us again. Just don't send those files to my board, or my family." His throat tightened. Panic throbbed behind every word. "I can't change what I did. But I'll accept the consequences. I'll resign, say it's a health issue, make it clean. If you want the job, maybe it's yours." Orion would leap at the opportunity to partner with someone of my caliber, someone who actually holds sway. I could place a single call and set everything in motion. Martin's voice had frayed to a thread, desperation bleeding through as he grasped at anything that might buy him mercy. Alan had kept quiet until now. When he finally spoke, his words were sharp, cold as frost, laced with quiet contempt. "You really believe this is up for discussion?" He stepped forward. Martin shrank back a fraction, as if expecting a blow. But Alan had long since shed the desire to resolve things with violence. "This isn't a bargain," Alan said, voice low and absolute. "I didn't go to all this trouble so you could slink away on your own terms. This isn't negotiation. It's a reckoning." Martin's eyes went wide. Fear took hold of him. "Please," he breathed, the word barely audible, steeped in panic. Alan regarded him with a calm that was almost unsettling. He felt no anger, only the cold clarity of inevitability. "You took Jenna from me," he said flatly. "You stood beside me like a friend while you were sleeping with my wife behind my back. You thought I was too blind to notice, that I didn't count. You tore my marriage apart and assumed you'd walk away untouched." His tone hardened, sharpened by finality. "You were wrong. Everything has consequences. Yours are past due." He turned the envelope in his hand, then let the photographs spill to the ground. They fluttered down around Martin like dead leaves. By instinct, Martin bent to retrieve one. It showed him and Jenna on that faded office sofa, entwined in a kiss that reeked of betrayal. He looked up, lips parting, perhaps to deny, to beg, to justify, but Alan had already turned away, disappearing into the dark fringe of trees, vanishing into shadow. Martin slumped onto the nearby bench, broken and silent. A short distance away, Alan reached his car, tucked beneath the arch of tree limbs. His heart still thundered from the confrontation, adrenaline humming beneath his skin. But the night's work wasn't over. He slid into the driver's seat and inhaled deeply, steadying his breath. Then he opened the glove compartment and retrieved a tablet. Inside the car, the only light came from the screen as he connected to his phone's hotspot. One final message remained. This one had to be deliberate, irrefutable, and devastating. Through meticulous online digging and cross-referencing public records, Alan had secured private email addresses for all 12 members of the Apex Dynamics board. Now he composed the message, concise, anonymous, crafted to pierce where it would matter most, the board's sense of integrity and fear of scandal. To the board of directors, Apex Dynamics. This message concerns a grave breach of ethical conduct by Vice President Martin Blake. Enclosed is video evidence of Mr. Blake engaging in a sexual encounter on company property. The other individual involved is the spouse of an employee from a rival firm, creating serious potential for coercion, blackmail, and an undeniable breach of corporate ethics. This conduct reflects not only poor personal judgment, but a genuine threat to the credibility and public trust in Apex Dynamics. I urge the board to act quickly and decisively, consistent with the values Apex claims to uphold regarding ethical leadership. Alan read over the message once more. He checked the video attachment, a carefully edited yet unmistakable clip that left no ambiguity, and verified the recipient list. He hesitated just for a moment. Faces like Martin's floated to the front of his mind, those who bent every rule for their own gain, always assuming no one would call them to account. Then he saw Jenna again, her betrayal like a slow burn in the dark. He pressed send. No drama, no cinematic score, just the faint digital whisper of the message leaving his outbox, a final, quiet strike. That night, every director at Apex Dynamics received the same anonymous email. It claimed to be from a concerned insider, flagging serious breaches of executive conduct. Attached was a time-stamped video, clear, undeniable, showing Martin Blake in an act of infidelity, captured within the very walls of his office. The accompanying note revealed the woman in the surveillance footage to be the wife of an engineer employed by a competing firm, implicating Mr. Blake, and consequently Apex, in a web of potential blackmail and scandal. The message concluded with a sharp admonition. Leadership isn't solely defined by accomplishments, but by integrity. Epilogue. Retribution for those who had deceived Alan came swiftly and without mercy. By early Monday, Apex Dynamics had officially cut all connections with Martin Blake. The decision followed an emergency board session held over the weekend. In public, Apex offered a brief and carefully phrased statement. Mr. Blake has chosen to resign due to personal matters. But insiders understood the unvarnished truth. The leadership acted quickly, unwilling to risk a reputational meltdown over one man's indiscretions. Martin's fall from grace was abrupt and irreversible. Stripped of his executive status, he was unofficially blacklisted from the industry. No credible firm wanted to be associated with someone so tainted by controversy. His undoing became a silent warning passed in murmurs behind closed doors, a lesson in how private misconduct can dismantle even the most promising career. News of his exit trickled through the corporate rumor mill in hushed exchanges. At Orion's main office, Alan overheard two co-workers near the break room coffee machine. "You hear Blake quit Apex?" one asked in a low tone. "Yeah, something personal. Sounds like a scandal," came the reply. "I'm honestly not shocked," said the first. "People have been talking about some kind of inappropriate behavior." Alan stirred his coffee calmly, not betraying a flicker of emotion. "Office gossip," he replied with a shrug before quietly leaving the room. He felt no pity for Martin, only a measured satisfaction that the consequences had finally caught up with him. Once considered an industry frontrunner, Martin Blake had become untouchable. No self-respecting company would dare bring him on board. His name now lived in whispered stories, a case study in how personal weakness can destroy professional legacy. In contrast, Alan Reed's stature within Orion rose dramatically. His composed handling of the situation, at least from what little was visible to others, earned him swift recognition and a new title, Director of Product Engineering, a position that many had been eyeing. Co-workers congratulated him warmly, unaware of the full scope of what had unfolded. Alan accepted their praise with humility, though beneath it was a quiet, personal sense of triumph. Jenna's unraveling, on the other hand, didn't play out in the public eye. It happened inside the intimate boundaries of their once-shared life. The evening after the footage was revealed, Alan chose to confront her. Over dinner, his tone was level, deliberate. "We need to talk," he said, placing his phone gently on the table. The screen lit up, revealing incriminating emails. Color drained from Jenna's face. "Wait, what is this?" she asked, attempting a nervous laugh that faded almost immediately. "Were you going through my messages?" Alan met her gaze with quiet finality. "No more pretending," he said gently. "I know everything." In that moment, whatever mask she had left shattered. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered, voice trembling, tears already gathering. Alan tapped the phone once more. The screen changed to a still frame from the video, Jenna and Martin locked in an unmistakable embrace on the office couch. He turned it so she couldn't look away. She covered her mouth as the sobs came, the full weight of her actions, and what they had cost, finally bearing down. Apologies tumbled from her mouth in a frantic rush. "Alan, I'm so sorry. I never wanted it to end up like this. It just spiraled. I swear I was going to stop, I really was." She reached out, fingers trembling, trying to brush his arm. He pulled away, expression closed, unreadable. There was no need for more words. He'd already heard them all in his head. Alan's voice was measured, unwavering. There was no anger in it, no raised volume, just finality. As her pleas faltered and her sobs overtook her, he finally spoke, cold and clear. "It's over, Jenna. Our marriage, everything we had, it's done. You've broken it beyond fixing." His words didn't need fury. Their stillness struck deeper than rage ever could. Jenna begged, asked for forgiveness, for a second chance. But he simply shook his head. This is the end." By week's end, Jenna had moved out, taking shelter with a friend. Alan watched quietly from the doorway as she packed what little she could carry. A suitcase, a few scattered possessions. Her face was hollow, streaked with tears and filled with regret. She left her house keys on the kitchen counter, murmured a strangled farewell, and walked out. Alan didn't say a word. He closed the door behind her, gently, resolutely. It was the last line in the chapter they had written together. Not long after, the divorce papers came. In the weeks that followed, Alan offered only polite detachment. He was civil, composed, untouched by emotion. There were no angry confrontations, no theatrical scenes. Just the quiet, irreversible unraveling of something too broken to mend. Eventually, Jenna would come to see the full scope of what had unfolded. The man she'd betrayed hadn't struck back with fury. He had let her leave unscathed, physically, but the consequences lingered. She was left with the wreckage, a ruined marriage, a sullied affair, and the inescapable truth that her own choices had brought it all crashing down. As the days went by, the business world moved on. Apex Dynamics quietly restructured, replacing leadership and reaffirming its principles. Meanwhile, Orion Automotive surged forward, gaining respect, clients, and momentum. Only a few insiders grasped the full story. That one betrayed engineer had orchestrated a silent, strategic reprisal. No lawsuits, no outbursts, just precise moves and quiet influence. One brisk morning, a month after the collapse, Alan Reed stood outside the house that once held their life together. Her things were gone, leaving empty corners and fading memories. The final divorce signatures were just days away. Soon he'd sell the place, move on, start anew. With coffee in hand, he stood watching the sun rise, its light softening a heart still heavy. The sting of betrayal hadn't dulled, but beneath the ache there was a quiet sense of justice. In a world where lies often went unpunished, he had made sure this one did not. He took the last sip of his coffee and walked to his car. Another day of work awaited. At Orion, he was no longer just an engineer. He was a man others respected, known quietly for turning heartbreak into resolve. None of the people working beside him could ever truly comprehend the magnitude of the turmoil he had survived, or the way he had managed to master it. As Alan guided his vehicle through the morning traffic toward the office, he allowed himself one last look in the rearview mirror, catching a fleeting glimpse of the life he was leaving behind. A faint, knowing smirk tugged at the corner of his lips as he returned his focus to the road ahead. He was well aware that the scars carved into his psyche wouldn't fade quickly, but those very scars had become emblems of his resilience. He had been betrayed, broken, yet in the aftermath, he had clawed his way back to stability, crafting his path with purpose and precision. In the quiet left behind by the upheaval, he recognized his journey for what it truly was. He hadn't just survived, he had prevailed. Not by striking out in anger or seeking revenge, but through foresight, discipline, and unshakable resolve. Those who had conspired to bring him down had ultimately orchestrated their own ruin. And in that quiet victory, both bittersweet and profound, Alan discovered his equilibrium. He had proven something few ever come to realize: that the most potent force in any conflict isn't a weapon forged in fire or launched in fury. It's the mind, sharpened by experience and used with purpose. Our story has come to an end. What do you think about this story? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed the way I tell stories, head over to my channel and check out my other videos. May the force be with you. See you soon, my friend.